Welcome to Whose Story Is It? Where extraordinary lessons are hidden within everyday stories. Join us today in revealing the untold stories within a business leader's success. Enjoy as we uncover the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Whose Story Is It? And today we are lucky enough to have a person from the Midwest. And some of you may or may not know I was born in Wichita, Kansas, and spent my first 13, 14 years in that lovely city. So nice to talk to a Midwest folk every now and then. So, thank the 3 or 4 listeners. Appreciate you being here. I'm looking forward to another great episode. So let's get this party started. So give us a little rundown. Give us some introduction of who we're talking to today.
Yeah, sir, certainly. And thanks for having me. I grew up in California, and I pretty much spent a number of years in tech and sort of migrated, slowly living in Arizona and Nevada. And then I ultimately ended up in Omaha, Nebraska. And I'm here now, and I work basically in tech. I work with early stage founders.
Cool. Very cool. You were in Arizona. I didn't realize what years were you in Arizona?
I lived in Arizona. I was back in, would have been 2015 to 20, let's see, back up. I moved to Arizona in 2010 and lived there for almost about 5 years. So it was really good. It was hot.
That's an understatement.
That's one of the things you realize is you discover what heat really is. What was most interesting about Arizona is I moved from Arizona to Nevada, and I actually liked Arizona better because there was more vegetation. It was more of a natural desert. If you look at Nevada and Las Vegas, it's basically like a dry lake bed, and you're sitting in dirt and rocks. And Arizona was actually, Phoenix was beautiful. You had cactus and trees and mountains and all these things. And even though Nevada was a little cooler, but no, it was a good space to live, and worked for some companies there and working in IT.
That's great. Yeah, I lived there from 90 through 98. So yeah, I loved it there. I love the heat there, actually. I just love I still do. I like a lot of heat, so I really enjoyed living there. It's great. I'll ask the only question I ask every single guest is the first question, and that is, how did you earn your first dollar that wasn't from a relative?
It's a great question. My parents, my father particularly, is very into landscaping and having a nice yard and doing all the things associated with that. So when I was a young kid, I would help him, put in drainage pipes or dig holes for trees or whatever else. And then with that, I started going around the neighborhood and helping people shovel rock and move trees around and plant bushes and whatever else. So I literally started shoveling and digging when I was probably, 13, 14 years old. That's what I was doing. And they were paying me, I think I was charging like $5 an hour, and I would dig holes and shovel rock.
There you go. That's how you get started, right? Had a little side gig. That's awesome. Yeah. Had a little side gig. What is, in your day-to-day, your day-to-day life, at least from the business side of it, what's the part of that you really enjoy? Like if you're in your day-to-day, you spend your 40, 50, 60 hours a week working, what is the part that you really enjoy doing every day or every other day?
The thing I really enjoy is solving problems. A lot of times when someone is starting especially a tech company, there's a lot of different steps, a lot of different things involved with that. And I really like sitting down and chatting with them and talking through, okay, what would be the next step? Like what makes sense from a product standpoint? What makes sense from a sales standpoint? How do we move this idea forward and get a company off the ground? I really enjoy formulating what that pattern is, because there's a lot of commonalities. When you're working in tech and try to get a company off the ground, there's a lot of common patterns there. And figuring out what to do there. I had a conversation with a guy like a couple days ago. I went on a hike with him, and we were hiking in the Black Hills. And he was telling me he's got this idea for an app for a company, And I was like, oh, well, you need to do this and do this. First off, who's your customer? How you
Oh,
going to
sure.
sell
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Go get some
Yeah.
LOIs, go get some early engagement before you do any development or anything.
Oh,
Like,
sure.
go start validating your
Yep.
customer, your pricing, the interest. Like, those are kind of conversation. That's the conversation I had with him. It's fantastic. And, walking the Black Hills on a trail was great too.
Yeah. No, that's not such a bad area either. Um, what what is if you look back at your call it your childhood years, like let's say 8 to 18, if you could change anything about those years, what would it be?
Um, I would have done better at school. I was horrible at school. I hated school.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I hated homework. I hated doing homework. And now that I've got kids, I feel bad for them.
It's coming right back at you. It's like, hey, you were a
Yeah,
bad student. Now you're going to be punished for it as
yes,
a parent.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. So those are those things. It's so basic, but I wish I would have known. Really basic. I wish I would have known how to study because that's a skill set I didn't
Oh,
learn. I didn't learn how to educate myself or learn or focus until I was older, and I wish I knew how to do that because I probably would have done better in school.
oh, I've never heard that. That's a good. That's really good. Because like I was opposite you. I was actually a very good student. I love school. I absolutely love school, and
Yeah.
so but it's always done me well because I learn things quickly because I've always been learning. I've literally always been reading and listening, and that's how I learn. And so I don't, yeah, I never think of like some people don't have that skill because they didn't learn it when they were younger.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, so you were really good at school. You enjoyed doing homework and
All that
all the
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah,
It drove me nuts. Like, I hated homework. All I wanted to do is be older and have a job. That's all I wanted. And I knew school was the path to get there.
sure.
So I had to go through this hell in a way of
Yep.
doing homework and tests and all this stuff I hated doing. But I knew that was the path to get a job and make money basically.
Correct.
And I did not learn how to study until I was in college. I discovered, and everybody's different. Everybody has different,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
different, different practices or
Yep.
approaches to getting themselves to focus and sit down and produce something. And I didn't learn that until I was in college. And I discovered that if I got up at like 3, 4 in the morning before a test,
Yeah.
the day of the test, I get up at 3, 4 in the morning. I'd sit down and I'd study for that test, and then I'd go in and I'd like do great.
Yeah.
Or if I needed to write a paper, I'd get up at 3, 4 in the morning to sit down and start typing a paper away.
Yeah.
And I discovered that pattern. And I also discovered, I had to listen to music, and I had to listen to music I've heard before, not new music, but music I heard before because I was able to drown it out.
Correct.
Just weird idiosyncrasies I learned around how to study. And I didn't learn that until I was in my like 20s.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
if I would
funny.
have known that as a kid, it would have made a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. What do you do for fun? Like what's
Uh,
the
the biggest I like to play, hang out with my kids. I got 5 kids, so it keeps me busy.
that keeps you busy?
But yeah, I mean, doing stuff with my kids. I go run, I go to the gym. Those are nice activities. Just something to change. Sometimes I've gotten into playing video games lately,
Oh,
which
cool.
is kind of
Yeah.
odd, but I used to play games for a long time. Then I stopped. I worked for EA Games for a while, which was great. Uh, Electronic Arts, which was
Yeah.
fantastic.
What years was that?
I was there really at the prime time. I was there when they just came out with the iPhone and the iPad.
Oh
We're
wow.
talking 2007,
Sure.
2008,
Yep.
2009,
Yeah. Yeah.
2010. Like, it was amazing because I was there when they're coming out with, they're moving from these flip phones and the phones with keyboards,
Yep.
an entire shift in the industry, moving to a smartphone and screen only and no keyboard, which
Mm-hmm.
obviously Apple and the iPhone did that. They moved the entire industry in a completely different direction. And I was there when we used to have, they had 4 or 5,000 phones on site to test with because you had 4 or 5 different form factors, 4 to 5,000 different form factors, operating systems, and everything
Yeah.
else. Now, in the industry, it's really it's no longer fractured. It is literally iOS or Android,
Yep.
and the majority of the phones have pretty much the same form factor.
Yeah. 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 And it's so much easier. I was in that business back in 2003, 4, when
Yeah.
the devices were just crap then. That was the whole problem. And then like the turns, 2005, 2006, and then the set, all that just dramatically switched to the devices actually started being worthwhile. And yeah, it
Mhm.
wasn't quite as painful to
Were you on
develop
the
on
hardware
those.
side or software?
Yeah, we had software that, our problem was we were probably about, I'm going to say 18 months too early, and the devices were just crap, right? Where
Yeah.
there's the old Thera, there was all these just crappy devices, and there just wasn't any
Hmm.
good devices yet. And so we got, we got some traction, but it would have been a very different story if we'd have started 18 months later, because we would have had the iPhone to work with. We would have had, some of those, more smartphone devices versus the, all those variations
Oh
that
yeah.
got them to the
I mean,
smartphone, right?
imagine we were making Tetris. I mean, we're making like Tetris on your little flip phone. I mean,
Yeah,
and today
yeah.
you can't even, like you can't even comprehend. Like I remember they came out with Madden on the iPhone. They're like the first. I mean, they
Oh,
released Madden and they did like $100,000 in one day of business
yeah,
uh, when that app came out. And you could never do Madden on a flip phone. I don't know how you do that. Madden
yeah,
football.
yeah, yeah. No, it is. That's a whole different. That reminds me of a question. Here's kind of a macro question.
Yeah.
Like, what do you believe has been the biggest thing that has changed in operating a business over the last, say, 15 years? What do you think has changed the most? If you could pick one thing,
No, it's smartphone. I mean,
the
without a
phone.
doubt. Oh, it's the phone. I mean, without a
Yeah,
doubt, your smartphone. You can do business now anywhere, anytime. I mean, it substantially moved everything in a whole other direction in terms of accelerating business. I mean, now you're constantly connected to your phone, and phones culturally are acceptable now. I remember,
yes,
when the first iPhone first came out, I used to have a Windows flip phone, Windows
sure.
E. Anyways, I always had like, I'm like a gadget nerd.
Like
But
the Windows Sidekick, was that a
yeah,
Windows device? A
yeah, something
Sidekick?
like that. I had one of those, and like
Yeah,
people would stare at you funny if you're
yeah,
sitting typing on it. You're like, "What are you
yeah,
doing?" You're like some weirdo, right?
yeah, yeah,
But now you can be standing in line at McDonald's or wherever and hold your phone in your face, knowing everybody's doing it.
yeah. Yeah, no,
And
that's so true. How our culture has made it just way more acceptable to kind of have you can have a phone literally anywhere.
yeah, yeah, anywhere, no one will say anything,
No
and
one will say anything. You could
you
be
can
in
be,
a flippin' spa and
yeah,
stark naked, and you could be on your phone, and
yep.
somebody would not even take a second blink at it.
Oh, and you can email your boss and or whoever you're working with, and that's the thing. You can now work anywhere, and it's socially acceptable. I think those two components have shifted or accelerated business and technology and thought and ideas and the sharing of that.
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely agree. Here's a question that I told you I wanted to know, and I told you not to answer before we started it. And what do you like about living in the Midwest, or middle of the country, depending on what you want to call it? Like, what, why there, and what do you like about it?
So I'll answer it in two ways. First off, I relocated here for a job. Um,
Sure.
I knew a guy and I made a phone call and he's like, "Hey, you want a job?" I'm like, "Sure." He's like, "It's Omaha." I'm like, "Okay, I'll move to Omaha." So I
Yeah.
moved to Omaha and I didn't know a lot about the Midwest when I first came out here. And now considering I lived in California and Arizona and Nevada and, pretty much the West, um, living here, it's you know things I like. Cost of living is a huge benefit
Oh yeah, huge,
here.
huge difference.
Huge benefit, cost of living,
Yeah.
and then just I think to me there's a lot of opportunity here. I think there's a lot of overlooked opportunity here.
Hmm.
For venture capital and tech and stuff, people usually focus East Coast, West Coast. They don't think about the Midwest.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of activity in the Midwest. There's a lot of unique opportunities here. A lot of people focus on ag tech. A lot of people
Sure.
focus on B2B SaaS here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, there's a lot of major corporations centered in the Midwest, so there's a lot of definitely brain wealth and just knowledge, good talent pool. I mean, there's a lot of things I've learned about the Midwest I did not realize until I moved here.
Yeah. And the obviously the pace is different. You know, the pace there is different.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I know, because when I go, or I haven't been back to Wichita for like 7, 8 years, but the pace is just different, right? It's a different pace. Is that something that is a magnet, or you dislike that?
I think the pace is good. I feel at an advantage because I'm used to a faster pace.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel that, especially for the industries that we work in and what we do, the faster pace is good.
Sure.
But the flip side of that, I worked for like so I came out here for a job, worked for a big company, and it took a little while to get used to slower pace.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's everybody generally in the Midwest is a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday
Yeah.
approach to work. I mean, at 5 o'clock it's a ghost town,
Yep.
and if you're still sitting there typing away at 5:30, you're working late. Like based on their
Exactly.
definition. So that's a little different, but but I also, to me, I look at that as an advantage. If you're one that, likes to work a lot and grind and get some produce and work, pretty much all hours, like there's some advantages
Yeah. Yeah.
here.
Yeah, no, it's you're. I do forget about the fact that it is a it is a thing where 5, the sidewalks kind of roll up at 5, and
Hmm.
people go, they go home and do whatever. But
Oh
yeah, you
yeah.
forget about that, because if you're, I lived in Seattle, I lived in LA for just a bit, I lived in Phoenix, and it doesn't. That's not like that. It's
Yep.
just not like that, right? You work till 7, 8, 9 is not weird or even unusual, right? So
Hmm.
so yeah,
Where did
that's
you live
a.
in LA?
I lived in just outside of Griffith Park.
Okay.
So it was a cool little area. I used to get up and run in the morning in Griffith Park. I lived there. Would have been 98, because I was just kind of. I actually had a job in Phoenix. Weird enough, and I lived in LA. When I lived in Phoenix, I moved and then got hired to go back, and I was like, I'll just come. I'll fly back and forth, which kind of worked. It kind of
Yeah.
worked because I really liked LA. I really enjoyed that
Oh yeah.
environment. I had a great time. I met some wonderful people, just great guys. I met, like, the first couple weeks I was in town, and they were wonderful. I mean, they knew all, they'd been there for years, so they knew all the places to go. They knew all the places, they just knew all the stuff that you want to know, right? And yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed I was there about a year and a half. It was
Okay.
quite
Yeah.
fun. Quite
I
enjoyed it.
lived in El Segundo when I lived in
Oh,
LA.
sure. Yeah.
So great
Yeah, I
area.
was just. It was, like I said, it was great. Couple, few years of fun for me. But yeah, I would. People always say it's hard to meet people in LA. Man, I had no problems at all. Boy, I met such great people there.
Hmm.
Um, if you knew in a year from now that you were going to die, how would you change the way you live today? You have
Um,
1 year. You have a terminal illness. You
yeah.
have 12
Yeah.
months to live. How would you change how you live today?
It's a great scenario. I think probably, I would spend more time with the kids. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing.
Sure.
Um, I would probably, still work because that's something I enjoy, love doing, but maybe take some of the stuff I do that's sort of monotonous or more, less glamorous, you can say,
Uh huh.
like, accounting or, something like
Sure.
payroll, whatever.
Yeah.
Take those off, assign them to somebody else. But I would, I take that, shift that time, focus more on my kids, spend time with my kids, but still doing the things I like to do around ideas and strategy and,
Sure.
different approaches to launching a company.
Yeah. What's the greatest accomplishment of your life thus far?
Greatest accomplishment, I, I don't want to get too sappy, but I mean, I think it's just raising kids. I mean, that's to
Yeah.
me, it's like my kids. they're all, this is probably credit to their mother because they're all, they all play musical instruments and they're all involved in activities and everything else. But to me, it's like watching them grow up and learn and grow and do the things that kids do is like probably the greatest thing. And to me also, I kind of look at my responsibility as sort of even, I'm blazing this trail for them. So like, hey, we can do these things. Like they're enabled to do these things and have these opportunities. That to me is like the biggest thing, is like give them experiences and opportunities.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, anyone that has kids, my wife never had kids, but anyone that has kids, you kind of expect them to answer that. And most people do, honestly. Most people answer it with their kids or maybe something that happened with their kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's your best friend? What's he or she's name? What's he or she's name?
Yeah, his name is Keith.
Keith. Okay, if I called Keith right now on the phone, said, Keith, tell me about this guy. What's his best trait? What would he tell me?
Great question. I would probably say just consistency, determination. Those are probably two things.
Okay. If I asked him what the worst trait is, what would he tell me?
Consistent. No.
Yeah.
Not the same thing. So worst trait, I would say that's a good question. Maybe I would say, I'm trying to think. I haven't heard that one before. Maybe just the fact that it's, I make assumptions. I'm overly optimistic, we'll say.
Okay.
Because you operate on some level of optimism, but there's a difference between optimism and reality.
Sure.
Sometimes reality is different than what you think it is, and trying to reconcile those two. Now, I would also argue having some amount of optimism when you run a company, that is beneficial because it's
a required thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to ignore some realities to some degree.
Yeah.
Or you would never take the risks and do those things that are necessary to move a company forward.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You have to be an optimist at some level to be, especially a founder, like a guy starting the company. Otherwise, you will never attract people. I mean, there's lots of things that wouldn't happen if you didn't have some optimism.
Yeah.
Because it's a hard road, as you know, to get down the road and make a successful company, no matter how experienced you are, or sometimes even how inexperienced you are. It doesn't matter. That's an important one. What was it? Give me a mistake that you made in business that you remember that gives you, or at least taught you something like you would value a lot. Like, what's the mistake that you gained the most knowledge from?
I'll tell you, I can probably get as specific as I want, but there was a mistake in business. Years ago, I was a project manager. I kind of grew up as a project manager doing IT projects. And we had a large project with a large, major car company who shall not be named.
Sure.
We were building a learning platform for them. Okay. And we had a lead developer on that project, and we had a 14-month schedule or a 12-month. It was about a year development project. And so we spent a lot of time, spent a lot of time on closing the deal, getting the project started, gathering requirements, doing all those necessary things. And we handed this, and the lead developer, you going back to knowing better now, he's like, I can build the whole thing, it's like, tens of thousands of hours of development is this estimate. And he's like, I could do the whole thing. I'll just work nights and weekends. I can do the whole thing myself. And fortunately, the owners of the company at the time were like, yeah, go ahead. Sure. Go for it. If you do this all on your own, we're going to make a ton of money because we don't have to hire a big team to do it.
Yeah.
And I was a project manager. I didn't know better.
Sure.
I didn't have a better understanding. I understood project management methodologies, but I didn't understand the complexities and the amount of effort to build technology, especially building basically a web application and an enterprise-sized web application. And
Yeah.
we, I basically we focused on UI UX design. We kept showing the customer and doing demos of like what the front end was going to look like, and really kind of think about Figma, what it is today. And we're showing them this front end, but there was no back end connected.
Yeah.
The guy's like, I'm working on the back end, I'm working on the back end. And it was like this for several months. And I mean, it was months and months that I'm working on the back end. And then as you can kind of think how the story's going to go, we got down to the last month of the schedule, and I go to my boss's office. I'm like, there is nothing.
Exactly.
I'm like, well, you have no back end. And I should have, said something much earlier. But anyways, I remember him calling the developer up. He calls him up because he's working at home back then. And this is 2005 timeframe. So he calls him up on the phone. He's like, hey, John's in my office. He says, you got nothing. You can't log in. There's nothing there. But you told me you're working on it. What's the status? He's like, yeah, I'm working on it. And he's like, well, where is it really at? He's like, well, I still have these 17 or all these other things to do. He's like, so we're supposed to be done in 30 days. You have nothing. Like, this is a reality. So going back to the, maybe the optimism, the reality finally collided. I mean, it was painful. And I remember basically the 12-month mark. I don't know what moment that was, but at that moment, like the next day, I'm out there hiring developers.
Yeah.
I spun up a team within, we'll say, I mean, literally, I'm hiring people on the weekend. I'm finding people who haven't come in to work. We hired a team of like 30 people to get this thing done. So I brought 30 people on board, all these consultants and developers, and I'm running for about 6 months. We did a scrum in the morning and a scrum at night. So we had a 9 a.m. scrum and a 9 p.m. scrum every day with this team.
Wow.
We worked 12 hours a day for 6 months and got it done. And we're ordering food and everything else to move this thing forward. And that was an experience. Like after all these years, 20 years later, I still remember that experience and that process and, the mistakes that were made. And
sure.
It was hard knocks. I mean, it was, I learned a lot.
Yeah, it was painful.
Oh yeah.
Painful.
All right, we got it done, and they're still using the product today.
Sure.
Which is wild.
All that matters. You got it done, right?
Yeah. Got it done.
What's here's another good one. Give me a memorable story that you were embarrassed at. Like, give me something I would remember, like an embarrassing moment in your life.
That's good. That's a good one. I'm trying now. I got to try to think of something here, but I will say this, and this isn't like a single thing, but the worst part for me is when you're embarrassing, and maybe nobody notices, maybe they do, but when you're presenting something to a customer or client and you like have a spelling error or you have the wrong client's logo on the slide,
sure.
or, little things like that, and you there's a mistake.
Sure.
I don't say anything. I just keep going.
Sure.
But there's something wrong there. That's certainly like, I missed, like, makes you double check things.
Yeah. What's funny is somebody that knows you will probably know that there's a mistake because they could see it in your inflections and maybe movements.
Oh yeah.
Because they would see, like, maybe you get flush, right, or something like that. Like somebody that really knows you would know it, but people that don't know you, they would just assume everything's all good, right? So we've all had those times where you just totally, like, you're like, oh man, why is that? Why is that picture there? That's not even the
Yeah.
right picture.
And it goes back to, I always look at it this way. No one knows you're ugly unless you act like it. Like, you know, if something's off,
Sure.
as long as you don't call attention
Yeah.
to it and
Exactly.
you just ignore it, no one else will notice either.
Yeah. That's the thing about when you give a speech, like when you do like a keynote or any kind of just speech where it's your speech. Like there's no, maybe there's a slide deck, maybe there's not, but like just a speech. Like no one knows when you screw up. Like
Yeah.
no one knows. Like no
Yeah.
one knows because you're the only guy that it's your speech. Like
Mhm.
so if you mess up a date or something, no one even has a clue that the
Yep.
you know. So that's the beauty of like I love public speaking and I actually want to do more of it. I do some, but I love it and I always just laugh at that because like I can't screw it up. Like I
Mhm.
mean I can from my point of view, but only from my point of view, right?
Yeah.
Right? As long as the audience is getting the content value out of it, then it's successful. But you can totally mess that up. Um, if we met a year from now, what
Mhm.
would you want to be celebrating?
Let's see. A year from now, I would want to. So I have some clear goals I'm trying to achieve right now, and it's a very clear path I'm on. In my mind, there's a very
Mm-hmm.
clear path, and
Sure.
my goal is really a year from now. I want to be celebrating the execution of those goals.
Yeah.
Um, there's somebody I went to. Somebody was talking to me a couple days ago, and there's a concept of your rocks, your pebbles, the sand, and the water, and trying to fill all these
Oh.
things into a
Oh.
jar.
Sure. Sure. Yep.
And some people know this concept, but if you put things in the wrong order, they will not fit. Um,
Correct.
and so you start with the rocks first, and basically, I have rocks I'm clearly trying to fit in the jar right now, and if I can fit those in the jar and they go the way they should, then everything else will fit as well in the
Yeah.
next 12 months.
There you go. There you go. That's good. Yeah, I love the rocks, the sandal. That story is great because you know I don't remember. I think I heard it from a teacher first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was just such a great story, it was probably 30, 40 years ago, and I heard that story, and I still remember it. Like when people, it's just so it's just so good, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's
what
very true. I mean, and I think a lot of people get distracted by the sand or the water or other things.
mm-hmm.
They get their priorities out of whack,
Yeah,
and when you because of noise or other things, maybe their own desires or ambitions that they think are important. But when you do that, you don't accomplish the most important things.
yeah, exactly. Hey, in your life today, is there a time where you don't feel like you can be who you are? You know what I'm saying? Is there a time where you feel like you can't be the real person?
Mhm. I think I think so. I will flip it a little bit like this, but basically, what I've so there's certainly a different. I'm a different person than when I worked for a company.
Yeah.
Like working for a company, you're very much and I don't mean to be derogatory, but you're a cog in a machine.
Correct.
You're fulfilling a function within a larger organization within a whole, and
Yes.
that function now you have to be really good at that function, that whatever that is, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're doing. Now, because I have a business, run a business. I'm a lot freer in terms of what I think, how I approach things, what I
Yeah.
do.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly changed who I am and how just my life in terms of what I do and say. And it gives me a lot more freedom and creativity. I'll say
Yeah.
that. Absolutely. Like I can, there's things where previously when I worked for companies, I would never be able to say and do and experiment with or try or take a calculated bet here or there. You can't do that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
now I can. I have the absolute freedom to do all those things.
yeah, yeah. So, John, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Give us the real
Yeah,
introduction.
certainly. So my name is John Bunting. I am the CEO, and I also started BSO Studio. We are a startup studio. We work with tech startups. We help them raise capital, build their software, their technology. We help them with sales and marketing, and we're located in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, and the what made you start that? Like, what was the like? It's a hard. I mean, that's a hard road because one, from an outsider, I don't live in Omaha. From an outsider, I'm like, well, there can't be a lot of those companies in Omaha. So I gotta have a fairly small pool, right?
Yep.
And secondly, I do know this for a fact. It's very hard to get a company over the hump, so to speak, right? It's just hard.
Yeah.
It's even the best companies doesn't matter. Um, so how do you? Why did you start that? Like, what were you thinking?
Great question. So I'll back up. When I lived in Las Vegas, I co-founded a startup studio with a couple business partners, and we really didn't know what we were doing, and we made some mistakes.
Sure.
And that company basically eventually failed, and I left and moved to Omaha. And I got here, and I became a cog in a machine. I started working for a company. It was a great company. I really enjoyed the people I worked with.
Yep.
But I had this pull. I don't know what, just internally, it just said, go work with tech startups, go do something of that entrepreneurship kind. And I spent about 6 to 9 months, I think it was probably about like 9 months, writing a business plan of how to basically create a better startup studio and what to do better. I researched there's probably about 500 startup studios in the world. I
Oh yeah.
researched them all. I looked at all their different models, and I formulated what I think would be better. And then in January 2019, I started executing on that business plan.
There you go.
And we've been honestly, our model really hasn't changed since then. I mean, it's maybe more refined, but the process is very clear in terms of what we do. And frankly, to me, I found there's a lot of opportunity because I looked at geography wise, there wasn't a startup studio in the Midwest.
No.
There was
What's
one,
the closest one to you? What's the closest one to you right now?
yeah, great question. So there at the time, and I might do we're checking on this, but at the time there was one in Denver and there's one in Chicago and maybe Minneapolis, but I mean, it was like 5 or 6 states. There was nothing. There's this gap. And I looked at more of an opportunity around the location,
Mm-hmm.
doing one in Omaha because it's very centralized to the United States.
Yep.
And the fact that you have a lot of large companies in the Midwest, so you have a lot of different good skill set and talent. You have a lot of capital available for investors. There's
Yep.
there's there's all the ingredients that you would want exist in the Midwest. Um, and so, but it is certainly a challenge. We work with you're talking very like I have at the idea stage. I have an idea, and we're taking them all the way to about a seed stage in terms of fundraising and a
Sure.
product.
Yeah.
And so we're playing in the very early stages, which is great because we get to work with startups that VCs won't even touch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but there's inherently a lot of risk in that, and to me, it's patterns and processes, and there's a lot of commonalities that you can do to
Yeah.
mitigate those risks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like you say, there's not a lot of people knocking on those guys' doors in Dodge City, in
Yeah,
in Chadron, Nebraska. I mean, like, there's not a
yeah.
lot of people knocking on those doors.
We talk
So
to 300 to 500 startups a year,
yeah,
and we
yeah,
work with 1% of them. Like that's our selection rate.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and honestly, as you've learned and know, there's if you talk to 300, I can guarantee you that 150 are probably not worth even having a
Yep,
conversation with. Yeah,
yep.
yeah. Just straight off the gate, like you already know they're not gonna get anywhere.
Hmm.
Um, that's cool. I mean, that's you can kind of be a big fish in a actually sizable pond, like right.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, because you are, like you say, there's not many of you running around, and after, you've been doing it for 5 years, after a while, pretty soon people know you.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting. I mean, people come to us all different types of ideas. I mean, the two ingredients you're looking for is a great founder and a great idea.
yeah,
And generally, we work with non-technical founders who have a number of years of experience in their industry, and they know technology can solve or optimize that industry, and they also have the ability to sell to people in their industry.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's great. And what do you think is the what what's been maybe a secret sauce that you've developed and or practiced that's gotten some of your cohorts over the hump? What are some, give me one that you think,
Yeah,
a success story or whatever, but here's maybe why it happened.
I one really key thing is LOIs, letters
Oh,
of intent. So if you're a tech founder, if you're interested in doing a startup, go
mm-hmm.
get LOIs from your customers without a product. Like go to them, sell it to them, get them to sign some sort of commitment
Yeah,
that if you build the product, they will buy it.
sure.
That is a powerful thing to have in terms of I can go to investors now because I have some validation. I've
Mm-hmm.
demonstrated I can connect with the customer. I can sell to a customer. I
Yeah,
know who my customer is. My customer is willing to commit some level of something. That is probably one of the most powerful tools that we've discovered and found moving a tech startup forward.
that's great. That's great. I mean, it's good advice, and it's true anywhere, right? It's literally
Yeah,
true anywhere. It's not just true in Omaha. It's true anywhere.
yeah. You don't need to write software. Go get an LOI.
Yeah, go get an LI. Go get somebody that says, "I love your idea, and I will give you money if it actually existed."
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Well, hey, John, it's been quite a session. I quite enjoyed it, and I really love the idea of you going to Omaha and starting this, because I think there is that, like you said, there's this thing that exists in the Midwest or in actually other parts of the country, but it exists in the Midwest, where there's just not a lot of opportunity. Like, how many times do they get to meet somebody with your experience? There's not a lot of Johns that live in the area. It just there's nothing wrong with that. They just don't exist. Where if you're in Seattle, you bump into them on the street. They're everywhere,
Yeah.
right? So that's kudos to you. I mean, good for you to get in this far and keep it up, because you're probably helping a lot of people. So,
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Mike.
well, that's a wrap on another episode of Whose Story Is It? We grow our audience mostly through friends sharing with friends. So please share this with a friend you care about. And of course, share it on your social media. We love that. Also, if you think listening to the podcast was entertaining and valuable, then please subscribe to next week's episode. So keep moving it forward, and join us next time as we continue to uncover the extraordinary in the ordinary. Have an amazing day.